Lee Summit is your destination for big city vibes and small town charm.
Head to the downtown Lee Summit Farmers Market, where local meets fresh. Then grab a cup of coffee and discover a variety of shops and boutiques just around the corner. Continue the fun in downtown Lee Summit at a retro arcade bar. Discover your new beer at one of our 6 locally owned breweries. Cool off with some handcrafted cocktails at happy hour. End the night with live music and good company. Lee Summit, Missouri.
Hello, Lee Summit. I'm Laura Increment, and this is your flash briefing for the week of October 28th. The City and Lee Summit Fire and Police Departments invite you to join us as we break ground on the Joint Operations Facility on November 8th at 10:30 a.m. at 2 Northeast Tudor Road, directly behind the current police station. This is made possible through the 2023 No Tax Increase Bond in partnership with the state of Missouri. The facility will be the future home of fire administration and training and the city's emergency operations and communications centers. We hope to see you there. Be sure to sign up for the city's free alert system, LS Aware. Receive emergency and non-emergency information by text, email, or phone for events such as severe weather and road closures. You choose how you want to be notified. Learn how to sign up at cityofls.net. Stay connected with the city. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Already do and enjoy the videos you've been seeing? Then head to our YouTube channel and hit subscribe to see similar content. A little bit of road news for you. A section of Northwest O'Brien Road between Southwest Ward Road and Southwest 2nd Street is set to close to through traffic today, October 28th, for approximately 3 weeks. The detour route includes Southwest Ward Road and Southwest 2nd Street. The closure is necessary for water main maintenance. And some good road news for you. 2nd Street from Southeast Green Street to Southeast Grand Avenue is back open. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
I'm Assistant Chief Jim Eden.
And I'm Battalion Chief Ben Hicks.
And today we're at Lee Summit Fire Station 3. Fire Station 3 was part of the 2016 No Tax Increase General Obligation Bond for Public Safety Initiatives. The station was built and occupied in August of 2020. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we've not been able to give tours or have an actual ribbon cutting. So we want to invite you in today to give you the opportunity to see what goes on within a Lee Summit Fire Department station.
Let's go take a tour. This is our admin side of the facility. We use this side mainly for offices. We have a lot of work during the day, whether it's training or doing reports or just generally taking care of the shift that we need to do. At this particular station, Station 3, we do have an assistant chief that works out of here. That person has their own office where they need to manage what's going on throughout the day with the shift and staffing, and as well as running calls out of here. The captain has their own office as well. What the captain does is at this specific station is in charge of both the fire truck that's here as well as the ambulance. And so with all those personnel responsibilities as well as running calls and reports, that's where they work out of. And generally for the rest of the crew, which is somewhere around 5 to 6 individuals, we have rooms to write reports, and we have additional training rooms and other rooms where people can work. Walking into our living area, I think it's important to recognize that we work 48-hour shifts. So in the evenings, after 5 o'clock, after work is done, we may have the opportunity to catch a game or something else as long as we're not running calls. And this gives us the opportunity to do that. When we go into our kitchen, I think this gives you a great reason to know why we go to the grocery store. When you see fire trucks at the grocery store, what we're doing. Also for 2 days working for 48 hours, we buy all our meals at the grocery store, and then we come in here and cook. Just like you guys do at home. So everybody has their own fridge on each shift as well as their own pantry, and then we cook those meals here. Going into the sleeping side of things, we've got a couple different things that are significant. We have our own laundry room, which again is important when we're here for 48 hours. The opportunity to wash and clean our clothes and bedding is very important for hygiene. And walking into where our beds are, we keep the kind of sleeping quarters over on one side of the building. It gives us both easy access out to where our fire apparatus are, as well as kind of keeping it a little bit quieter for those people that have been up all night running calls. We have 11 bedrooms here at this station, and the reason we built it with so many bedrooms is we want to give ourselves as a city the opportunity to expand. So if we need to put another apparatus here or numerous other people working at this station, that's already in place as far as infrastructure goes, and we don't need to go back and try to make it bigger or better, and that's really important for us, especially because the old station was so small. Back out on the apparatus floor, we had doors facilitated as many places as possible, so that way when we're sleeping at night and a call comes out, we can make our way out fairly quickly to get out onto the truck if we need to and run a call. On the other side of the station, we kind of have other stuff that we may want to keep separated if we want to. Physical fitness is very important to us as firefighters. So in order to better ourselves and make sure we're as healthy as we can to do this job, we have our own gym facility here that we kind of go throughout the day when we can and get an opportunity to come in and work out. Our goal when we run calls, when we get back to the station after calls, our goal is to get ready to go back as soon as we can to run another call. So we have the opportunity or capability here to fill up our air tanks. You see firefighters wear the big air tanks on their backs and they use those in a fire. We can come back and fill those up and make sure that we're ready to go again when we're wanting to go run another call. We have our own workshop here. We work on a lot of our tools and making sure that everything's clean and operational, and this gives us the capability to do that, again, to make sure that we have everything we need and we're as capable as we can be running calls throughout the city. Cancer prevention is very important in the fire service right now. Because of that, we have an extractor machine, and what this does is gives us the capability when we come back from a fire, we can put our bunker gear into this machine and get all that really nasty crud off of our gear. Again, kind of getting back into that cancer prevention mode, allowing us to be as clean as we possibly can for the next call. And finally is our bunker gear room. We each have our own individual locker. This gives us the opportunity to store our gear when we're not here working in between shifts, as well as keep a clean extra set on here in case we do run a fire and we need to clean our current gear. Typically, this is where your day starts off at the fire station. You come in and get your gear and put it on wherever you're working that day, and then you end the same way, bringing your stuff back to your locker to go home after working. This is Med 3. This ambulance just currently moved into the station from Station 7. Station 3, since we've had it built, has turned into one of our busiest stations in the city. Therefore, we wanted to provide the best care and the closest unit as we could. So we moved one of our ambulances up, and this became Med 3 for this particular instance. Out of this station, we also have Pumper 3. And that's a fire apparatus that they utilize to run the calls on this west end of the city. The last vehicle that you see is the chief's vehicle. We have 2 shift chiefs on shift every day, and they split the city. And this chief running out of this station typically covers the west and south area of the city, while our chief of Station 2 covers kind of that northeast section of our city, and they divide it up evenly.
Thank you for going on a tour with us today. If you have any other questions about the Lee Summit Fire Department, please go to our webpage at lsfire.net or follow us on Facebook at Lee Summit Fire Department.
Thanks for joining us on the tour.
I am Fred DeMoro. I represent District 4. I've been on the council for 4 years, just completed 4 years. They were good 4 years, lot to do. And prior to that, I was on the Charter Review Commission. Prior to that, I spent 7 years on the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission is actually the advising body to the City Council for land issues and development issues. I've always been interested in the city, and I actually, a current council member is the one that gave me the urge to, or push to actually join the Planning Commission. And I just wanted to get more involved. I think he got tired of me asking questions all the time, so he said, let's put him to work. The one thing that we are passionate about, or I'm passionate about, is reducing the burden of property taxes on our residents, and by that we have to attract more commercial development to get those commercial property taxes, commercial sales taxes involved. And as a trickle-down theory, that actually reduces the burden on residents. It sort of move from a bedroom community to a more diverse community tax base. I am Public Works Chairman, and we actually found money for a stormwater rate study Now, what that will do is we will have a consultant come in and tell us how to actually enact or enable a stormwater rate to build a fund for being proactive on stormwater issues. We have a lot of stormwater issues in Lee Summit. We're surrounded by water. We're surrounded by lakes and river and things like that. And that is a big accomplishment. I know the Public Works chairmans before me had always tried to get that forward, and we finally did. And right now I think we've got an RFP for a consultant. And it's important to remember that we have to keep our infrastructure up, and that's just not stormwater and/or water utilities. That's curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and everything like that. I've been a resident since 1986, and when I moved in 1986, it was a small town, small city. And it is very interesting to have seen everything happen since 1986. And we have grown immensely. Citizen involvement is very important. I think that it makes us a better community. There are all kinds of people out there that have really great ideas that would fit well in our boards and commissions. And really, it's minimal time invested. They would be surprised of what they can do, the good they can do in a short amount of time. One meeting a month or one meeting every quarter, and really move things forward. And then, help the council with the idea of what the community is actually needing and saying, and that's always important too.
We will call the October 30, 2024, 4 p.m. Tax Increment Financing Commission meeting to order. First item on the agenda after calling it to order is roll call.
Chair Freeman.
Present.
Vice Chair Rhodes. Secretary Haynes. Commissioner, is it Aisel?
Present.
Commissioner Bates. Commissioner Shrout. Commissioner Willarth.
Present.
Commissioner Haley.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Hudson.
Present.
And Commissioner Carnes.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum, so the next item on the agenda is public comments. And just to be clear, if anyone from the public wants to make general comments, we're more than welcome to receive those. If anyone wants to make comments specifically related to the proposal today, you should reserve those until we have the public hearing, and then you can make them when we open it up for public comments there, and that way those comments will be on the record. Having said that, does anyone wish to make any public comments? Seeing no one, we will move to the next item. Next item is election of officers, chair, vice chair, and secretary. So having said that, I will open the floor for nominations. Mr. Willer told me I was supposed to electioneer beforehand, and I didn't do that, so.
Advice. I will nominate you to continue as chair.
Second.
It does. Any other nominations for chair? Hearing none, we'll close the floor for nominations for chair. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion carries. That leaves us vice chair and secretary. We go like Randy, he's not here. Floor is open for nominations for vice chair. I will nominate Randy Rhodes.
Second.
Second. Any additional nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the floor for nominations. All those in favor of electing Randy Rhodes as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion carries. Secretary.
So moved.
So moved. Any additional nominations? Hearing none, the floor will close. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion carries. Well done. Next item on the agenda, oh, wait, I skipped. We need to approve the October 17, 2022 TIF Commission action letter.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection, I'd move that we approve them as written.
Second?
I will second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the October 17, 2022 TIF Commission action letter as written, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is item 5C, 2024-6598, public hearing, Oldham Village Tax Increment Financing Plan, Oldham Investors, LLC applicant. I need to swear everybody in now. Anyone wishing to give testimony in this matter, please stand now, raise your right hand, and be sworn. Yeah, if you think you might testify, go ahead and stand now.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bushek.
Yes, good evening. David Bushek, Chief Counsel of Economic Development and Planning. To begin the hearing tonight, I'll first cover the order of the presentation. I will be speaking first and covering some TIF 101 basics. In the past, we've typically had a separate meeting of the TIF Commission, which is a sort of TIF 101 refresher session. And I see some new faces here, and it's been 2 years, so I thought I would cover just some of the basics to engage your brain with the common acronyms and you're in tune with what we're talking about, because it's sort of an acronym-heavy discussion when we talk about TIF and these other incentives. So I thought I would walk through these and just hit some of the high points. This presentation that I'm showing you, I gave back in March to city staff, and it runs through all of the incentives that the city uses, or virtually all of them. I'm only going to cover the TIF pieces, but you'll see some other things in these slides. So the first thing I will do is go to slide 3. This is the acronyms that are most commonly used for incentives and economic development, TIF. Some of these others you will see in the context of this project, but they're not before you tonight. Just the TIF plan is your jurisdiction. And so we're focusing on just the TIF items. TIF, tax increment financing, pilots, payment in lieu of taxes. That's the property tax increment that's created by the project. So we start with the base taxes where they are today, and whatever that increment that's created by the new project, that's the increment in the phrase tax increment financing, and state law allows 100% of that increment to be captured and used to pay reimbursable project costs. Then the next term is EATs, economic activity taxes. Those are basically the sales taxes that are generated by the project. Technically, they're also utility taxes, but they're very hard to track, and so we typically don't bother with the utility taxes capture. But the sales taxes, the TIF Act allows for 50% of the new sales taxes that are generated by the project to be captured to pay for reimbursable project costs. So we are starting at 0 sales on this property. Whatever sales are generated, the sales taxes, half of those, 50%, are captured by TIF, go into the special allocation fund, which is the last highlighted term, and can be used to pay for reimbursable project costs. The other 50% of the sales taxes flow to the taxing districts as normal, and that would be the city, the zoo district, and the county as the principal sales taxing districts. And then if the CID and the TDD are approved by the city council, those will also be sales taxing districts that operate within the area, and half of those taxes would also be captured by the TIF. So those are some of the basic terms that we typically use. The next slide I will go to is slide 5. And this is just a primer on how incentives work generally, and this is what I've discussed with the City Council. These are the 3 types of incentives. Tax abatement, which is something that's not before you tonight, but it is part of the incentive mix that's being requested by the developer using the LCRA, or Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority tool. Second, tax redirection, that's principally TIF. As I just said, the property tax increment and the sales tax increment are captured and redirected back to pay for reimbursable project costs. So category 2, tax redirection, that's what a TIF plan is. And then the third, a new tax or a new special assessment. In this case, that would be the CID and the TDD. Again, that's not before you and that's not your jurisdiction, but it is part of the incentive mix, and I'll be describing how that works when I make my presentation later. Benefits of the incentives generally to a developer reduces their costs in the case of tax abatement. Second, a reimbursement source, that would be TIF, so that is your jurisdiction. And then the third category I've talked with the council about and our staff about, enhancing goodwill, just means more notoriety for the project, the fact that the public is more aware of the project when they're in front of you and in front of the city council, just kind of a goodwill catch-all category. And then the benefit of the incentives to the city, obviously development, in this case redevelopment, and then the tax revenues that are generated by the project. I covered with our staff the different types of tax revenues, and I thought this slide may be most useful for you because this is a page that if you go to the county's website and look up any parcel, it'll show you the array of taxes that are due for each parcel each year, and there's a link you can click on which shows this graphic, which is where are my taxes going. And so this graph is 100%, and it shows how each taxing district is a portion of that 100%. So the school district, it's usually around 70%. I think in this case it says 66, and this is from last year, I believe. And then the cities is usually around 17%, county, and then you have the other taxing districts here. And I thought this was a useful graph visually to see the weight of the property taxing districts. Tax abatement, won't cover that in detail. Tax redirection, I said, that is TIF. That is your jurisdiction tonight, so you'll be acting just on the TIF plan. And then there's the other types of tax redirection tools that we can use, which I talked to our staff about. And then there's that third category of new taxes or new assessments, which again are present here, and you'll see those later, but that's not your jurisdiction. It's just the TIF plan that you're considering tonight. And then the final slide I will show you is just my catch-all kind of basic questions and answers. How is a TIF plan created? TIF Commission provides a recommendation, which is what you're doing tonight. Then the City Council will act by ordinance on the TIF plan. TIF plan is not a separate entity like a CID or a TDD. The plan is just administered by the city, and then the developer controls the project. The city ultimately implements the TIF plan, even though the developers present it to the city. The purpose is to fund the reimbursable project costs, to reimburse the developer, and we'll talk about that later. The funding sources, as I said, that's the real property tax increment and the sales tax increment, which will be captured. The geographic limit, the revenues are only collected within the boundaries of the redevelopment area and specifically the project areas, which we will also talk about tonight. The contractual powers, the city typically has a contract with the developer. In this case, there'll be multiple contracts to implement the TIF and the other incentives if the city council approved those. Duration, within each project area, TIF collection can last for up to 23 years, and that starts on the day that each project is approved by ordinance and ends 23 years later after that ordinance is approved by the City Council. And then finally, bonds. Bonds can be issued. It's not common for the city to issue bonds for a TIF project. I don't believe we've done that for quite some time, but it's an option for the city if that's to the city's advantage to issue bonds as opposed to use a pay-as-you-go reimbursement method. That concludes my comments, TIF 101 generally, and then the next part of the presentation will have the developer come forward and provide their presentation, and I will pause and see if you have any questions about general TIF and what I just covered. Any questions?
Good evening. Matt Pennington, President of Drake Development. Appreciate you having us tonight. I'm going to just start. Actually, I'm going to bring this a little bit forward here. Perfect. So the project is called Oldham Village. I think most of you probably are well aware of the location, but we're on the southwest corner of 291 and 50, and this project itself has taken, it's evolved over time. We started the assemblage back in 2021, and it was kind of led off by the initial Odessa auto auction acquisition. So as we dove into it deeper, we saw, just the challenges that this property had, not just here locally, but just if you look at it, we'll dive into it deeper today regionally, and how those affect everything around here. So. The interchange has been a really good benefit to seeing this property at least have a chance for redevelopment. And the way it sits today, it's very industrious, right? You go over there and it feels very, very industrial. So, the first step as we evaluate any property is, okay, what is the highest and best use? What can be the best for the taxpayers in time? And as we looked at it, and if you look at different roads and how they intersect here in Lee Summit, we were lucky enough to do Streets of West Pryor, and you see how that's kind of transformed, and a lot of it is just how roads bisect and how people interact with the city. This here is one of your premier intersections, and it may not be the highest and best use for industrial over time. So that was just kind of the fact-finding mission that we went through, and then the second is can we sustain a mixed-use environment here? Those are the questions that we had to answer. So. Here's the properties. In all, it's taken us almost 3.5 years to get here to be able to present to you today. There's 18 properties in this red line district that you see here that are part of it. Today, we have control of 15 of them. We have been extremely transparent with neighbors, stakeholders that are immediately next to us, the churches, the city, as we evolved the plan for this property. So. Just like all of our developments, we try to take not only feedback from our tenants, but from the people that are surrounding us and how it's going to work with them. And I feel like what we're bringing forward to you today includes all those different aspects and people's ideas. So this is what it looks like. I think most of you all know what it looks like. There's 3,000 Ford trucks on there. There's no surprises on that. It's over 50 acres that we've now been able to assemble. It includes that industrial building that you see out here, that white building, and then it includes all the property along both 291 and 50 there. The hope that we're heading towards, like I am alluding to here, is going towards a mixed-use environment. So that's our big opportunity. Here's just some pictures of just the blight. I don't really need to go into much more of it. I think we know where it's at. We've seen it. This was something as we purchased the initial Odessa portion, which was 35 acres. We quickly realized if we were going to transform this area, we had to have everything. You can't just piecemeal this. I mean, we could have easily just done a Band-Aid approach, and that just wouldn't have been the best use for not only taxpayers, but for the city in general long term. And as you look at the growth of this corridor, this was so important to get all of these properties assembled, and that's why it's taken us 3.5 years to get here to be in front of you. And it was important to have control of everything, to have a complete plan so we can tell tenants, restaurants, other people that, hey, this is going to happen. It's going to be first class. It's going to turn into first class all around you, and you'll be safe here if you invest your dollars. More pictures. I think, imagine doing a site tour with a high-end restaurant. If you saw something like it, and we don't have control. So as you assemble different properties like that, obviously costs continue to increase, and especially as you're looking at, I don't know if I'd call this infill, but it's a complete redevelopment, right? It's infill / redevelopment is kind of where we're at. It's not greenfield. But we have multiple blighted properties, and it was extending all along 291. So I call this a complex property assemblage. It is. There's existing businesses. There's issues. This is as hard as it gets as a developer to try and accomplish to get to this point where everybody's on the same page. You've got it assembled, and you got one shot to take it over the edge. So I say how happy we are to be here. It wouldn't have happened without help from cities, help from the adjacent property owners of that. They want this to happen. So. There's some of the different issues that we discovered along the way is just regional sanitary sewer upgrades. This is a big one. This is a large number that essentially we're taking care of a problem that not only services this property, but it upsizes the sewer line for properties that exist today, such as all the homes in a large district. And I'll show that district here. It's about 800 acres. But I think the most importantly, as we look at growth and additional tax dollars, it unlocks the whole east side of 291. So, and we'll get into that here in a second. The roadway relocation, there was a large master plan put together called Envision LS. And as we look at anything and we look at, how are we going to craft a development that works, we usually always kind of start with that master plan. What is the city envision of this? And then start working with our tenants and crafting different variances to it. As part of that Envision LS, Oldham Parkway it needs to be relocated and brought further in, and we'll see that in just a second. The MoDOT coordination on this has been one of the hardest, coordinations I've had to deal with. We're abandoning right away, we're picking up right away, there's moving roadways, relinquishing property. It has taken us years to get here to be able to sit in front of you and say we're ready. If you drive along Oldham Parkway today, we're going to underground all those power poles. So it's unattractive. It creates a much more first-class experience for a mixed-use environment. Reconstruction of the regional stormwater conveyance system. You'll see this in some other pictures. And then I think the biggest one, if you look at the site today, there's almost a 40-foot grade drop. You may not see it, but if you walk out there and you look from the top to the bottom, there's a reason you can see so easily over the site is it's that grade drops from top to bottom almost 40 feet. So those are the different challenges that we've had to deal with. This is the sanitary sewer upgrade chart that you can see here. This is an area that, as part of the recommendations, there's recommended improvements that we're taking care of problems to upsize the actual sanitary sewer district, not just for us, but for a large area. This is that area. It's about 834 acres that this sewer will service for the future. So if you look at the hashed area, that's Oldham Village in this actual depiction. And then the east side, where it says 24.52 acres, undeveloped industrial lot, that's the area I see as just completely unlocking because we'll be doing the sewer as part of this. It unlocks that whole east side. So you look over there and you wonder, why didn't that develop? Looks like a nice piece of ground. Well, these are the different costs that we're encountering right now and taking care of. So why is this important? It's a catalyst for redevelopment on 291 and 50. 291 and 50 is one of the most exciting corridors, I would argue, in the city. Not only because of the church now selling their land to the south, there's just a moment that we need to take advantage of as a developer. I say city too, because it's coming. And as you look towards the south, it's all going to open up here over the next decade. So how do we do that? We establish a high-quality gateway community at a prime commercial location. We believe we've done that. It allows a development of property that's been largely underutilized and heavily blighted. I don't know if anybody can disagree it's been blighted. It's something that I just alluded to. I had to clean it up to be able to have this chance to get to the multifamily or get to the mixed-use environment. And it seizes a critical window. I just talked about that. Upgrades the sanitary sewer of 835 acres, integrates the adjacent park. There's Lee Park that's behind this. So we will be integrating our development into that, kind of like what we did with Lowenstein Park at Streets of West Pryor, which you saw how that turned out. And then it creates new tax revenues for the city. So all important parts to the project. Now you look at what the project is. This is a mixed-use project. And I like to kind of break it down into percentages. So if you look on the right-hand side here, we say restaurant retail is going to be almost 50% of this project. Multifamily is less than 20%. Civic space is 18%. Other is 14.9% for the total of 100%. The civic component of this project is, at this moment, the field house that the city of Lee Summit has been contemplating. So I think what's been exciting about this is it's turned not only into a public-private partnership, but a true civic partnership with the city as we try and move forward and work together on it. And then you can see the multifamily units in the back. And as we do mixed-use development, multifamily is an incredibly important component. You see it at Streets of West Pryor. You watch how it works just in and out. And if you look at a lot of previous developments, look at Summit Woods, it would be great to add some multifamily to that. And you look at some different areas in the city that you are seeing more densification in some of these suburbs with more multifamily. So it's an important component not only for us to recruit some of the best restaurants, but for the whole project to work as a whole. This is just some aerial views of it. We are working, I'm gonna go back just a second here. So when we look at projects, ours are not spec. When we're here in front of you, and I'm very, this is something I talk about every day, our developments are real. If we're approved, we're turning that shovel, the next day that we're closed and we get approved. So this is not a, hey, I think this is gonna happen, we're throwing a bunch of buildings on some paper here, and here's our TIF projections, and I mean, we've seen it all the time throughout the metro. We have tenant commitments. Chick-fil-A is signed, Q39 is signed, Starbucks is ready to go. We have a grocery store that is a deal ready to go, new to market. And we have an entertainment concept signed. So when I'm sitting here in front of you today, this isn't spec. This is ready to go with your permission. So these are just some of those views. You can see the field house component there on the back side. Working with the park currently on that to do 120,000 square foot field house. And then you can see Oldham Parkway, you can see how it's been moved back. From right now, it's kind of a frontage road, more or less, if you travel along Oldham Parkway. And what that does is and we agreed with Envision LS on that. We thought it was a good use of dollars because it does open up more opportunity for good restaurant and retailers. These are a look at some of the apartments. This is Q39. These are the actual renderings that they're ready to start here, binding permission. And then I'm gonna go very kind of broad scope, and I know David's gonna dive into the details of the incentive package. I'm happy to come up here. I have my entire team here that'll answer as many detailed questions as we wanna get into, but I'm just gonna kind of go broadly over it. We have a $182 million project in total of what you're seeing on those renderings. The project estimated turn on the incentives with no incentives is 0.68. So this results in a pretty large gap for feasibility. So what are the tools to fill that gap? One of those that we've ID'd is obviously TIF. CID, TDD that David alluded to, this is also part of our project request. And then the LCRA, this is already in an LCRA district. And then we're using some of the advantages of that LCRA as part of our incentive request as well. So by using all of these tools, and David will get into the kind of the details of that, and again, I'll come back up here and answer any questions that you want. It gets us to a much more acceptable term that we can get financed at 7.08%. So with that, yeah, we respect your time. We ask for you to consider this. We think it's an important point here in the city of Lee Summit as we're making that turn with all the growth to the south, and here to answer as many questions as you can. So I think if you just, as we're finishing, you look at the benefits. What are the benefits? Let's just recap them. It allows development of the property that would largely remain vacant and blighted. I think that's super important as this whole corridor's starting. It's over 180 million in investment. That's a large number. It's 750,000 in new annual sales tax revenue for the city of Lee Summit. So there's just a significant amount of benefits immediately, because I'm sitting here saying we're doing these users. This is not spec. So it achieves a market-driven development in concert with the city's comprehensive plan. I've already talked about Envision LS. We're trying to stay in line with that. It delivers the critical infrastructure, talked about the sewer, stormwater, power poles, and the roadways. The initial tenants, this to me is the most important as a developer, they're committed. They're committed. And nearly $3.5 million in annual tax revenues for all local districts after the TIF. It provides a prime location for the development of the field house. That's the civic part of this project, and it brings new to market uses and business to the community. This is the before and after of it. I've got a lot of renderings, but it just kind of gives you a feel of where we are today and where we think we're going to head. So that concludes my presentation. Again, happy to answer as many questions as we need to, and David will dive into the details of the incentives.
Willard.
Mr. Pennington, does the TIF area include the multifamily?
The redevelopment district includes the multifamily. I don't want to answer this wrong, David, but the TIF area is on the commercial piece, not the apartment areas. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. Correct, yes.
Additional questions?
Can you expand? You mentioned new to market grocer. And I'll have a question for David on how long ago we approved the TIF that moved the Price Chopper across the highway that now is Planet Fitness. Can you expand on who that grocer is going to be?
Does not exist in the market. I can't.
They're committed.
They are committed to the project, yes.
And maybe we can talk about the size of that store and revenue. One of the biggest issues we had in one of the TIFs that we approved to move that Price Chopper was cannibalization of dollars there. And guess on how you're figuring that now we're not cannibalizing dollars when we weren't cannibalizing dollars to move it in the beginning, 2.5 miles.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just go off what the tenant believes is the best for, the city. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's tough to really quantify how much cannibalization is happening. And we talked about this at Streets of West Pryor as well. But this would be a specialty grocer new to the market, something that you don't have today that, you believe the market is actually expanding. I believe it has with Streets of West Pryor. If I look at all the people that are actually being pulled into Streets of West Pryor, it's pretty wild. So we do look at, like they call it Placer AI, and it's kind of a data study, how they track your phone everywhere. And we look at people's habits. And I can tell you just at Streets alone, I mean, people are coming from all over Eastern Jack. So it's tough to quantify exactly how many more people you're going to pull into the city by a new user. But to answer your question, I don't have any data to say what's going to be cannibalized or not.
So I've got a couple that are very different. Environmental, how much field house, just curious.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to start with the environmental. So the environmental, we've done environmentals on the project, and I know in the past there was some concern on one of those sites. We believe it's not terribly bad, just based on what we've found. So I'm not going to sit here and say the site's glowing. We believe everything's manageable and will be taken care of as part of our remediation and redevelopment.
Like you know what you did.
Yeah, we know where we are. In terms of the field house component, Joe Snook has sent out a survey to the city asking for the exact programming up to that. So what I mean by that is, and I don't know if I should be saying it or not, but I mean, what I mean by that is that they're trying to determine what's going to be the best for the people here at the city and what they need most. So do they need them more basketball courts over volleyball courts? So those are the different things that are being worked through at the moment and laid out as part of this whole project that hopefully we'll be able to answer more detail here in the next 60 days. Right now, they're estimating 120,000 square feet. That could go, up or down depending on final costs.
Additional questions? Seeing none.
All right, I will provide the city's presentation. I will start with the proceedings and how the order of business could go. First, I'll provide the TIF plan review, then I'll walk through the findings that the city council has to make. And then, bullets 3 and 4 there, it's the chair's discretion. Either you can take public testimony and then ask questions of us, or ask questions of me and the applicant and then take public testimony. That's your preference. And then when you're finished with all the discussion and questions, commission deliberation, and then ultimately there's a resolution that's in your packet for action if you're ready to do that tonight. This slide is historical TIF data. There's a lot of data on here, but I'll summarize some of the key points for you. The columns are some basic data that we've collected about each TIF plan. So the year was approved, the size of the project, total project costs, the amount of TIF reimbursement that is provided for each plan, and then this TIF percentage, that's the percentage of TIF reimbursement compared to total project costs. And then total reimbursement is the entire incentive package, TIF, and any other incentives. And so these benchmarks, this total percentage and this TIF percentage, this is how we've traditionally provided an apples-to-apples comparison across all of the incentives that the city council has ever approved. We analyze the percentage of the total project cost that this incentive tool provides to the developer. And that's how we've done our comparison over time to measure how each TIF plan operates. So you'll see from this data that at the very highest, 32.5%, then the lowest was 6.2%. And so typically in a data set like this, and we're developing a decent data set, if you eliminate the high and the low, for example, then the range becomes about 11% to 24%, or if you keep the high and the low end, 32% to 6%. And then down here, you'll see the Oldham Village, and I'll get into more detail in a moment, but the TIF plan itself is 6.5% of total project costs. And then the total incentive package that developers requesting, TIF plus the other incentives, is about 25% of total project costs. So you can see this TIF plan, and if it's approved, how it compares to the other TIF plans. The TIF plan itself, as part of this incentive package, is a fairly low percentage as compared to the other TIF plans that the City Council has approved in the past. This table then shows you all of the incentives that this applicant has requested. So there's 5 different types of incentives. You've got the LCRA, which provides the sales tax exemption on construction materials and the property tax abatement for the apartments. The LCRA incentive is not before you tonight, just the TIF plan, but as I said, I'm providing this so you have context for the full incentive package. Then the TIF plan, and this is what I talked to you about in the beginning, the pilots component would generate, by the developer's projections, about $3.6 million in reimbursement, which is 2% of project costs. And then the economic activity taxes component, of which the city can capture 50%, is projected to generate about $8.2 million over the life of the TIF plan, which would be 4.5% of total project costs. And then across all of the array of incentives, as I just said, it's about 25% of the total project cost that the developer is requesting. But the item that's before you tonight in your jurisdiction is just the TIF plan and this 6.5% reimbursement that the developer is requesting through the TIF plan. This is the sources and uses page from the TIF plan. A good amount of data here, but the main thing that I'm showing you is In general, about 80% of the project costs are from private sources, and about 20% of the project costs are from the public sources that the developer is requesting. And the amount that's specifically available from the TIF is this number here. Developer rounded it to 7%. That's about the 6.5% number that I just provided to you. So this is how the developer would pay for the total project: 80% private sources and ultimately 20% either in cost savings or reimbursement from the incentive package that the developer is requesting. The City Council has to make various factual findings in order to adopt a TIF plan, and so we typically walk through these findings as our focus for you and then again for the City Council. And so the findings are that it's a blighted area, but-for test, which I'll talk about, conforms to the comprehensive plan, 23-year limit, relocation plan, cost-benefit analysis that is part of your packet, and then no gambling establishment. These are the 7 factual findings the City Council has to make if it approves the TIF plan. Blight. Of all the TIF plans and incentives that the City Council's ever considered, I would probably argue that this is one project where blight is absolutely no question. The City Council made a blight finding under the LCRA Act back in 2014, and then that area was amended in 2015. And the developers also submitted a blight study, which is part of your packet, demonstrating that there's unsanitary and unsafe conditions in the area and deterioration of site improvements. And then here's some of the data that I included, which is from the developer study, demonstrating that the majority of the parcels are in fact blighted by a fairly standard analysis that's used for blight. So I would say in this case, there's really no question about the blight. This is the map of the area that the City Council previously approved under the LCRA Act to designate these corridors blighted areas. And you'll see this area here, this is the focus area right here. This is the project, and it's included in the area that the City Council's already declared to be blighted. And I'm trying to go to the next slide. Second finding then that the City Council needs to make is the but-for finding and financial feasibility. And I've included the language here straight from the statute. Redevelopment area has not been subject to growth and development through investment by private enterprise, and this is the but-for piece, would not reasonably be anticipated to be developed without the adoption of tax increment financing. That's the finding the City Council has to make, which we commonly call the but-for test. And then there's also a requirement, financial feasibility. There needs to be sufficient information from the developer for you to evaluate whether the project is financially feasible. And I think there's plenty of data that's included in the plan and the cost-benefit analysis plus the analysis that I just showed you. Baker Tilly is acting as the city's financial advisor for this project, and we have Tom Calico here in the audience who can answer questions if you have more detailed questions. But they have concluded that the but-for test is met in this case. They've analyzed the rate of return with incentives and without incentives. And so there's a page that I will show you from this report that I think this is probably the best summary of their conclusions from this report. And I need to zoom way out. This is the summary page from that report. And starting at the top, the green dot, that's the rate of return that's expected, the upper boundary for the commercial components. And then the red dot, that would be their analysis of the upper boundary on the rate of return for the multifamily components. And then the black dot, the rate of return with incentives, Baker Tilly has calculated it's about 7.4% if the incentive package is provided. And then the bottom dot, and I left an important one off here. I didn't zoom out enough. There. Then the middle dot, the gray dot, that's the lower end of what would be a feasible project for multifamily. And then down at the bottom, that is Baker Tilly's projection of the rate of return for the developer if none of the incentives are provided. And that's obviously far too low for a developer to undertake the project. So their conclusion is that the but-for test is satisfied in this case, and that incentives are needed to reach a rate of return to induce the developer to undertake the project, and that matches the developer's statements and their calculations. So our financial advisors independently determined that that is a fair and correct conclusion. The next finding must conform to the comprehensive plan The Planning Commission has already heard this application, both the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 preliminary development plans and the rezoning action required for both of those back on September 12th. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the rezoning in both of those PDPs. And so we typically treat the Planning Commission's evaluation as our analysis as to whether the comprehensive plan is satisfied. And then when the zoning item goes to the City Council with the incentive package later this year, the City Council will also hold a zoning hearing, and if they approve that zoning, that's also the City Council's determination that is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. This is a snapshot of the city's comprehensive plan map. The map specifically calls for commercial in this area, and you've obviously the developer's presenting a mixed-use, commercial-heavy project, and the Planning Commission has concluded that that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. The remaining findings, there's not too much to these, really. The fourth finding, that the TIF will terminate no more than 23 years after each project is adopted, which will be the case. There's a relocation plan that's part of the plan. It actually refers to a city code provision that's the city code's codified relocation plan. 6, there's a cost-benefit analysis that's in your packet, and that's the basis of the analysis that Baker Tilly also used for their analysis. And then finally, no gambling establishment. And then the other required findings, the plan has to contain certain mandatory components, which it does. They have submitted a banking letter, which indicates they have a bank that's ready to finance this project if it proceeds. And then the developer has submitted an affidavit that it's an exhibit to the plan, testifying to the blight and the but-for tests. The city has adopted a economic development incentive policy, and the city's economic development incentive policy specifies a preference that TIF should be 25% or less when it is used. And as I indicated in this case, the developer's request with this TIF plan, just the TIF piece specifically, is 6.5% of total project costs. And then the total incentive package, as I told you, is about a little less than 25%. So the total incentive package is less than what our policy calls for just with the TIF plan alone. So this is within the constraints that are preferred by the City Council through the city's economic development policy. And then we will have the TIF contract control mechanisms that we have typically used. We use for Discovery Park, which was the last TIF plan that you reviewed 2 years ago. We use that for the Streets of West Pryor TIF plan, which Drake also has developed and is continuing to develop. So we will use these rate of return limitations, cost savings, and the phase reimbursement as appropriate in the TIF contract, which we will be negotiating with them shortly after this proceeds past the TIF Commission. And I will end on this slide. This is the same slide I showed you, again, to provide context for how this TIF plan fits into the total incentive package. And then the last few things that I will mention on, because these questions might come up, the city has executed a relinquishment agreement for the roads with MoDOT. So a portion of Oldham Parkway, which sort of bisects the property, will be relocated as part of this. The city's executed a relinquishment agreement, which will go to the Missouri Highway Transportation Commission in December. And if that's approved by the Highway Commission, then a portion of that road will come within the city's jurisdiction, and then the remaining portion will be sold to the developer. And the road will then be relocated, so it won't be in the current place. It'll be realigned like their design shows you. And I mentioned that so you know that we've already dealt with MoDOT, and we have the plans in place to move forward with that road relinquishment to allow for the realignment if the project is approved. The other thing that I'll mention is the city has executed a real estate contract with the developer to purchase that about 8.5 acre piece of property where the field house is located. So we have the arrangements in place to purchase that property, and we are in the due diligence period now. And that's it. That's the only other note that I mentioned from the comments we've heard so far. So I will stop there, and I'd be happy to answer questions, or you can ask questions of the developer. Oh, yes, thank you. I should have started with that. I would like to finish by entering into the record Exhibits 1 through 12, which are in your meeting packet.
Exhibits 1 through 12 are admitted.
Thank you. So that concludes my testimony, and be happy to answer questions.
A giant star besides that. Any questions of Mr. Bushek? Yes.
I have a question. It's more of a general question. You had estimates based on what the estimated tax revenue was going to be to the city. Do you have any historical data that shows what actual to estimate actually works out to be on these TIF projects?
Yes, we do. The city finance department tracks those revenues. So the TIF revenues and any of the special district revenues like CID or TDD revenues, our finance department administers those. So the answer is yes, we do have that data. I don't have it here at the podium with me, but that data exists.
Okay, would it be possible to get a representative copy of it to just get an idea? I mean, I'm just curious, you know, how the actual tax revenue, you know, comes in compared to what the estimates are that are presented to this board or to this commission.
That's a fair question. We can do that. I don't have
Okay.
that data prepared today, but that's something that we could prepare for.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Willers.
I just have a comment for city staff and its consultant that this is a far better presentation than 2 years ago when we did not have the city's economic justification for the but-for test at the time it came to us. And I'm far more comfortable looking at this than I was back then when I caused trouble saying we should take time to get that study. So well done by staff and their consultant.
Additional questions? Yes, Mr. Hudson.
To the point on the grocer, can you remind us what TIF that was? I forget. I want to say it was.
So you're talking about the cannibalization issue?
Yeah.
We discussed that in the context of the Streets of West Prior TIF plan, and I just pulled up some spreadsheets that I presented to the city council on that very issue. So when you mentioned that, I recalled, and I pulled up the spreadsheets that I showed the city council on that.
And the one I was talking about in particular was the price chopper. Because that was when the issue was such a big deal, because we were just moving that price chopper 2.5 miles and we were essentially giving them a brand-new store. I can't remember what year that was. I'm just curious more than anything. I'm very aware a grocer's not going to come to town and predict that they're going to lose money. I get that.
Mark Dunning, city manager. If memory serves me correctly, I think that was Todd George TIF as part of the East 50 Highway within that area. And if I'm recalling correctly, I think there was a condition through the TIF contract that with that new price chopper that the existing would remain in operation for no less than a year. I think was part of the conditions of that.
I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions?
Question.
Yes.
And this is probably educating the new guy here. So where does the developer fee fall into the calculation on the but-for test? And what percentage is it in this particular scenario?
Let me look. There's no developer fee that's specifically called out in their budget, so I'll put, that's the cost benefit analysis. One moment. I'm looking at the wrong one. Let's see. So I'll go ahead and put this, I'm just looking to see if there's something specific. We may need to have the developer help us look in a little more detail. But here's the budget page from the TIF plan. And there's nothing specific on developer fee. There's a line for professional services, which is fairly common. That's, I can't point with the mouse, the middle one here. And you'll see that they're estimating about $17 million for total project costs. Up to $4 million of that could be reimbursable. That doesn't specifically answer your question, and maybe we need a developer to answer that for us. Give us 1 second. Sure. Maybe if we could come back to that question, when they prepare an answer, we'll circle back as soon as they're ready on that question.
I believe the applicant may have an answer.
Commissioners, John Hanson with IRR Corporate and Public Finance. We're public finance consultants to the developer on the project. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be before you this evening. Sorry it took us just a moment to look up the details surrounding that question. The developer fee is part of the budget and was fully considered in the analysis by Baker Tilly in the but-for analysis, so that's completely integrated in that. And specifically to answer the question, the developer fee is approximately 2.5% of the total budget of the project.
Thank you. In your experience, that's a pretty normative percentage?
Maybe a little on the low side, but yeah, within a reasonable range for sure. Mm-hmm.
Is that a TIF reimbursable
That's yet to be determined based on the negotiation with the city in the TIF contract. It's not unusual for cities to say that that's not a eligible amount. Statutorily, it would be eligible for TIF reimbursement, but it may be the preference for the city in the negotiation of the redevelopment agreement to preclude that.
No questions? That's a quiet group today. Yes.
So we're only contemplating this 6.
I do not. That's something that we could have Baker Tilly speak to, but I'm sure the answer is incremental. So for every dollar that they don't receive in reimbursement, it affects the rate of return. And there's probably, I mean, I don't know if that formula exists already, but I'm sure it's an incremental answer. And so, yeah, nothing specific on that. Like I don't believe anybody's calculated if this piece is not approved, then what happens. That could be done, but we haven't up to this point. I would just say that overall, we feel like we're bringing a fair and reasonable request before the city with respect to the return. It's at the very low end, I think, of what any developer would reasonably pursue for the project, and I think that was affirmed in the Baker Tilly analysis and also affirmed in some analysis that we have done as well. 7% is just factually fairly low. So to take out 6.5% or approximately 1/4 of the incentive of the project would definitely jeopardize the project, probably take it into roughly the 5% in change range. I'm just kind of doing back of the envelope in my head there, but it would jeopardize the project not to have that component for sure. Correct. Thank you.
Additional questions?
That concludes my testimony. You could move to the public comments if you'd like at this point.
Any public testimony regarding the project?
Good evening. My name is Christine Bushyhead of Bushyhead Loft, 315 Southeast Main Street, Lee Summit, Missouri, 64063. I'm here on behalf of Hy-Vee Incorporated Corporate Office, 5820 Weston Parkway, West Des Moines, Iowa. Hy-Vee is here this evening because the developer has a plan to include the Hy-Vee store at 3rd and Ward within the boundaries of the Community Improvement District and a Transportation Development District. Hy-Vee is located a mile northwest of the proposed TDD district. These taxing districts are referenced in the developer's TIF plan and the TIF plan cost-benefit analysis, but the CID and the TDD do not exist. The TIF plan contains no exhibits which present to this commission the proposed CID and TDD boundaries. However, the TIF plan cost-benefit analysis and Exhibit 5, Sources and Uses of Funds, presents proposed annual retail sales data from these proposed taxing districts and tax revenue to be generated from the sales with no defined boundaries in the record before you. The revenues are speculative. I am sharing with you, and I'd like the overhead, please. This is the proposed regional CID boundaries as presented to the City Council at the developer's May 2024 conceptual presentation for economic development incentives. To orient you, the black area is the TIF plan you have before you. To the top is actually to the east, and the west is to the bottom. And you will, the point that I'm making is that the capture that's being proposed is beyond the boundaries of the TIF. And in fact, for purposes of Hy-Vee, this is the Hy-Vee store. I also want to show you the TDD boundaries that were proposed by the city staff at that same meeting. I missed that upside down. As you can see, the TIF boundary is here. It does not extend out to include Hy-Vee. The city staff's proposed CID boundary does not include Hy-Vee. No TDD boundary has been identified in the public record to date. Though the map must exist, since the filed cost-benefit analysis you're to review this evening sets forth numbers represented as TDD tax revenue to be generated. The use of a developer-proposed regional CID is not typical in Lee Summit or in the Kansas City, Missouri metro area. It is not provided for in the CID Act, as is a regional TDD is in the TDD Act. Hy-Vee will be opposing the inclusion of their Third and Ward store property within the boundaries of the proposed CID or TDD at every opportunity to do so. Today is our first opportunity. Adding another 1.5 cents on a dollar on groceries and other retail sales at the Third and Ward Hy-Vee store will not benefit the property owner, Hy-Vee, or its customers, and is in direct conflict with the purpose for which CID and TDD special districts are created. Now, you may be asking yourself, how is this situation relevant to this TIF Commission hearing? As you know, under the TIF plan, the tax increment financing laws, the TIF Commission has to make several findings related to the proposed TIF plan. One of those findings involves the financial feasibility of the proposed project. No redevelopment plan shall be adopted by a municipality without finding first, and I quote, a cost-benefit analysis showing the economic impact of the plan on each taxing district, which is at least partially within the boundaries of the redevelopment area. The analysis shall show the impact on the economy if the project is not built and is built pursuant to the redevelopment plan under consideration. The cost-benefit analysis shall include a fiscal impact study on every affected political subdivision and, emphasizing, sufficient information from the developer for the commission established in section 99.820 to evaluate whether the project as proposed is financially feasible. End of quote. This state statute is also quoted on page 3 of the developer's cost-benefit analysis. Hy-Vee is asking this commission to consider that it is impossible to make the state law determination that the TIF plan is financially feasible because the developer's proposed cost-benefit analysis includes the Hy-Vee store annual sales, and Hy-Vee is opposed to its inclusion within the CID and TDD boundaries. The projected TIF plan tax revenue, which is supposed to pay for the redevelopment project costs, making the TIF plan financially feasible, includes projected tax revenue from the Hy-Vee store when we do not yet know if the Hy-Vee store will be successfully located within the boundaries of the TDD or CID. When the developer's CID and TDD applications finally are filed, City Council members will be asked to make the CID and TDD boundary decisions at that time. Those decisions have applicable state law procedures, including Hy-Vee's right to testify in opposition to its inclusion at the required public hearing for the formation of the CID, and Hy-Vee's right to intervene in the court proceedings required for the formation of the TDD in opposition to its inclusion within the TDD boundaries. The CID Act also provides an opportunity for Hy-Vee to file a court action challenging the formation of the CID. Making this financial feasibility determination tonight with Hy-Vee property included is placing the cart before the horse. This comment is notice to the TIF Commission that Hy-Vee's inclusion within the boundaries of the CID and TDD is uncertain. Therefore, the TIF plan revenue projections based upon the Hy-Vee retail sales are uncertain. How can a determination be made that the proposed TIF plan is financially feasible if it is not clear from where the tax revenue will be generated, and if the tax revenue will be sufficient to pay the project costs? Further, the Baker-Tilly report on page 6, when describing the CID and TDD, also have no definitive boundary descriptions. The report does not speak to the annual sales assumptions from which the tax revenue will be generated. Again, speculative. However, there's a solution. Simply have the developer commit to remove the Hy-Vee property from the proposed CID and TDD boundaries and reduce the developer's proposed $113 million in annual sales per year in year one on page 5 in their cost-benefit analysis by the amount of annual retail sales the developer has estimated for the Hy-Vee property. As a person who runs these types of revenue projections, the proposed recalculation is not difficult nor time-consuming. Then this commission, and subsequently the City Council, if they choose and you choose, may find on the question of financial feasibility of the proposed TIF plan without Hy-Vee. Hy-Vee has been an amazing corporate citizen in the city of Lee Summit for decades. Currently, Hy-Vee has made a commitment to our LSR 7 to provide $12,000 in groceries each year for the next 5 years. Last year's food donations total in the community was $155,000, with most of that going to Lee Summit Social Services. House of Worship Partnerships feed 15,000 kids over the summer in partnership with Summit Church. They were active in the chamber and the advocate for the community, partnerships with fire and police, free customer appreciation lunches for 3,500 community members at each location, free Veterans Day breakfast, and so much more. Hy-Vee corporate giving benefits our community. Hy-Vee is not benefited by inclusion within the boundaries of the developer's proposed CID and TDD. The TIF plan does not list any roads, sewers, water lines, or buildings being constructed. The TIF plan does not. The first public description, available to the public, of what will be constructed in the lump sum line item site construction project cost in TIF Plan Exhibit 4 appeared in the 10/24, October 24th, last week, 2024, Baker-Tilly report, page 10. None of the, quote, site work, as described in the Baker-Tilly list, projects benefit the property owner Hy-Vee to support its inclusion with the boundaries of the CID or TDD, a legal standard. The only benefit information available in the public record is from the developer's May 2024 conceptual presentation before the City Council, which stated that the Hy-Vee property is located within the sanitary sewer district, and the proposed plan is going to upsize. Hy-Vee has no sanitary sewer issues. According to the developer's May 2024 presentation, the enhanced sanitary, and tonight's comments, the enhanced sanitary sewer system is to serve the new development and future development east of 291 South. And according to the developer's cell phone data, Hy-Vee customers use Oldham Parkway. The current traffic on Oldham Parkway is not near capacity. and certainly not all Hy-Vee patron traffic. The relocated Oldham Parkway is for the developer to create pad sites for Oldham Village. The proposed new development will generate the increase in traffic, which will make any improvements to Oldham Parkway necessary, not Hy-Vee. And if the developer lands a specialty grocer, as the Baker Tilly report indicates, there's a 99,300 square foot grocer that is in that report. As they expressed that they wanted to and have expressed that their intent to and apparently have, then incentivizing this developer to bring a grocer to this site is not in Hy-Vee's benefit, and Hy-Vee should not have to pay for it. As stated earlier, the Hy-Vee store receives no benefit from the planned CID and TDD projects, and the store should not be included in the boundaries. The store should not be forced to charge an additional 1.5 cents on a dollar on groceries and all retail sales at the store. The TIF plan as set forth in the document of record is not financially feasible. We ask that this written comment be presented as presented and hereby submitted, be made a record, an exhibit of the record. Thank you for your consideration this evening. I'll be available for any questions you have regarding this presentation and Hy-Vee's opposition to inclusion in the assumptions of in the financial analysis of this TIF plan. Thank you.
Receive that as and admit your comments as exhibit number 13. Yes, you may. Thank you. Anyone have any questions of Ms. Bushyhead? Yes.
I don't necessarily have a question of Ms. Bushyhead, but I'm just curious. Earlier, we were talking about cannibalization.
Yes, go
am I
ahead.
saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, so with this new grocer, I know we were talking about the price chopper. So is that considered with the Hy-Vee? Again, the new girl. Did we consider how this new grocer impacts the Hy-Vee that's less than a mile away?
Okay, so to answer your specific question, we have not done any analysis of cannibalization for this TIF plan, but I've done some, I would call it more generic cannibalization analysis when the Streets of West Pryor TIF plan went forward to the City Council. And so I can present that to you just to give you a snapshot of what I think the answer would be if and when we do a full analysis of this issue. And so I'm going to use my laptop. I think this will actually work. Sorry about that's pretty good. So this was a spreadsheet that I prepared for the City Council when we were analyzing the issue of what's the effect of cannibalization of the new McKeever's grocery store that did go into Streets of West Pryor and its effect on Target grocery store across the street, Hy-Vee down the road, the other grocery stores in the city. And so here's the analysis. And this was just one example of an analysis that I prepared for the City Council. In this example, let's say there's one existing store that has $25 million in annual sales in the primary trade area of the new grocery store, meaning where this new grocery store will go, that's also the trade area of an existing grocery store that has $25 million in annual sales, just to give you a number to put it on the table and compare. So you have the sales at the existing store of $25 million, which generates the sales tax indicated up here. And then the sales at the new store, in this example, the developer's projection there was $32 million, so that's what I used as a basis of comparison. And then I started analyzing the cannibalization rate and what it does to the sales tax revenues of the city. And only when you get to a pretty drastic cannibalization point of 60 or 70% does it start to negatively affect the total sales tax revenues that flow to the city. meaning you can have some cannibalization and it's still a net benefit to the city in terms of tax revenues. It's not good for the other grocery store, but I'm analyzing this from the holistic perspective, which is what we're talking about, financial feasibility of this plan and its impact on all the taxing districts. So that's an analysis. This is an example, but it's an analysis of how severe the cannibalization needs to be before it actually impacts. So I think that's the best answer I can provide to your question at this point.
Okay, and this was the estimate that was presented. Do we have actual data now that McKeever's has been there?
The answer is yes, we do. The specific sales tax data of any individual seller or business in the city is confidential, so we have to respect that confidentiality, but that is something that we can analyze in more detail. I mean, we could analyze the specifics, and we'd have to go back and do quite a bit of analysis, and I think I know which staff member would help me with this. What are the sales at McKeever's? What happened to the sales at Hy-Vee? What happened to the sales at Target? And analyze, did it decrease or increase? And since that store opened a few years ago, has there been a net increase in all this? I mean, there's a lot of variables there that we could analyze.
I just think that'd be important to the conversation, considering bringing in another grocer. Thank you.
We'd appreciate your analysis of Ms. Bushyhead's comment with regard to the relevance of the CID non-existence, as that would affect our legal obligations today.
Yep, that's a good question. So, as I mentioned, and I will switch back to here, again, so you can see the snapshot. As I mentioned, we have these other incentive tools that will be considered by the City Council. So let's just walk through this sequentially. The LCRA plan has already been through the LCRA board 4 weeks ago, and the LCRA board made a recommendation to the City Council on just that LCRA piece. So one of the things I was thinking about, listening to the testimony, if that testimony on the CID had been given to the LCRA board 4 weeks ago, I would have said that's a very valid public policy issue that the City Council needs to wrestle with eventually, but that will have to happen when the CID is in front of the City Council, and that's not directly relevant to that LCRA board's consideration of the tax abatement and the sales tax exemption as a discrete piece of the incentive package. I think my answer for the TIF is the same, but we do have the interesting issue of the CID revenues being blended into the TIF plan and into the overall analysis that Baker Tilly has done on the financial feasibility. So there's naturally some interplay between these incentives. And I think what the developer would tell you is this is the incentive package that they're requesting, and if the City Council doesn't approve a component of it, then there's a question as to whether the project can happen or not, and that's something that they would have to analyze based on the council's eventual approval or not of each incentive component. But there's one other important factor that I think is relevant on this issue. Let me do this. So, a little crude here, but the developer did a good job of presenting maps of all the project areas, but I realized about 2 hours ago we didn't have a single map with all the projects on them. So I hand drew it. So the black area, that's the TIF redevelopment area. But the colored areas, you've got numbered Project 1, Project 2, Project 3, and then Project 4. Those are the discrete areas where TIF will be collected. So if the CID boundaries are bigger than this area, the revenues that are generated by the CID will only be collected from a TIF perspective in these 4 project areas. So for example, if Hy-Vee is included or not, that will not affect the TIF revenue generation because it only comes from this area. If there's a CID sales tax in effect in this area, the TIF will collect half of those CID revenues only from this area, not from Hy-Vee, not from any other place that's included in the CID. However, the issue that's been raised today is a very relevant policy issue for the City Council to consider, and we anticipate that the City Council will be considering that when the CID is presented. So now to answer your question, how do you wrestle with the uncertainty of the CID because it has not been formed, yet you're considering the TIF plan tonight? So here's the best answer that I have. When a TIF plan comes to you, there's a large package of assumptions that have been made to present the plan to you. So they're making assumptions about what retailers will come into the area, what their sales will be, how the county will value the property, and then you try to project that over more than a 2-decade period. That's kind of challenging. when a TIF plan comes forward to you, it's very common that the CID and the TDD, if they're included, are not formed yet. That happens at the stage when the city council considers the TIF plan and the CID, and the city council does not pass judgment on the TDD. That's a court action, but the city council weighs in on that. So it's very common for the TIF plan and the TDD and the CID to go as a package to the city council, and the council acts on each one of those as a package eventually. And the issue of including other properties outside the boundaries of this area is a very valid issue for the city council to wrestle with when that CID petition is presented to the city council. I don't know if that's an issue you can resolve tonight. And also, whether that CID includes Hy-Vee or not does not affect the TIF revenue generation that comes from within these discrete 4 areas. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes, sir.
Are there other existing retailers that'll be, the taxes being imposed on in these projections? I mean, it's half of the incentive is the eats.
Not quite sure I followed your question.
Well, I mean, is Home Depot in it? Is Hy-Vee in it? Who's in it?
Yes, so the CID boundaries do include other properties both east and west, but the inclusion of those or not only affects the CID revenue that's generated, not the TIF revenue. So for example, let's say that the city council approves the CID, but it's only the 4 corners of this project. All of the revenue generation that's in the developer's projections and in Baker Tilly's report with respect to the TIF revenues is accurate. If Hy-Vee and any other retailers outside the boundaries of this project are not included, that impacts the CID revenue generation, which the developer will certainly be concerned about, but that doesn't directly impact the TIF revenue that's only generated within these 4 areas. And so, again, to sort of wrap up the policy issue which is presented, I agree, this is a very valid issue that the city council will have to wrestle with. Is it appropriate to include other properties outside the boundaries of a developer's project to pay for public improvements or not? But the genesis of this was really the city's idea of forming a CID and using it with the LCRA tool to reimburse the city for $8.1 million that the city's already paid to relocate Troop A from the 291 North interchange. That was the genesis of this plan. And so we had contemplated that the city would be generating revenues to reimburse itself because the city's already paid $8.1 million to relocate Troop A up north in the north part of the city.
Which is interesting because I was thinking that there was an extended, elongated CID that had to deal with that, so you answered that question. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Hudson.
I appreciate your analysis on the taxes and the cannibalization spread there. As I think about this, we're kind of incentivizing more apartments. And so as the city moves forward, and obviously I can talk to the council, I want to consider that because that's kind of what we're doing here. And also on the tax cannibalization piece, well, that's interesting, but that's not what a business is going to make their decision to stay or leave. And that starts to cross my mind as we start to talk about this kind of stuff. The business, Hy-Vee doesn't care about the tax piece necessarily. What they care about is their sales. And if we're raising the taxes on their customers, essentially, I get that argument. So as we think about it as a city, I understand that's what your job is to, right, protect the city. But we also have to think about, from a business standpoint, what we're doing to our businesses when we essentially are forcing them to compete with a larger market and condense that market into one local area. So that's not necessarily a question, but just something I want to be aware of. As long as I've been on the TIF Commission, these kind of issues continue to come up, and particularly with property tax and property tax abatement when we're bringing residents in, but not necessarily residents that are going to go to our schools because they don't bring kids, right? They're a younger population, as we know, with different analysis on apartment tenants and things like that.
One comment that I'll make is back to the array of the incentives here. The tax abatement piece, as it relates to the apartments, that's the LCRA component. So the TIF plan itself doesn't implement any tax abatement or sales tax exemption on construction materials. That's part of the developer's incentive package, but it's not the TIF plan, strictly speaking.
Any other questions of city or Ms. Bushyhead? Yes, go ahead.
Can you put your
Only within those 4 areas, correct? Correct. Now, the CID revenue and the developer's projection of the CID revenue obviously is a function of the other properties that may or may not be included, but the TIF revenue that's generated here doesn't come from any other store outside the boundaries of this area.
I have a question. If the CID hasn't been established, how can the developer know what the revenue is going to be and the benefit to them? Because it seems like that's a pretty big ask right there to me.
And so that's the nature of the projections when these plans come forward. As this stands today, it's all projections. It's developers' projections. It's our analysis and Baker Tilly's analysis of the developers' projections. We're operating under the assumption, for purposes of analyzing all of this, as it's presented to the city council, the developer's essentially saying, here's what will result if you, city council, approve all of these incentives. If the city council doesn't approve the CID, for example, or approves a smaller CID, that could greatly affect the revenue that's generated for developer from their incentive package, and that might make the project infeasible to undertake. But at this point, when you're considering the TIF plan, it's very common for us to be at this state. The CID is not formed, the TDD is not formed, the TIF plan hasn't been approved, but all of these things are considered in concert by the city council, and the city council usually says yes or no as a package. And if any of those get adjusted, that will affect the revenues available to the developer.
All right, Ms. Bushyhead.
What Mr. Bushak has just described is typical. If you have a development before you, that the boundaries of the CID and whatever other are within those boundaries. And Streets of Pryor's CID, I believe, is the same footprint of their district, okay? But you are considering the financial viability of this, the feasibility of this, and the cost-benefit analysis that you have on page 5 of the developer's cost-benefit analysis, the line item of the assumption of taxable sales that all the numbers get generated from is taxable sales, Oldham project, and expanded CID area. So there, and we've never had a CID that has any attempt in this community to have a CID that expanded, a regional. They've labeled it as a regional CID. And so you are taking into consideration the feasibility of this plan based upon these revenue projections. And you don't even know what they are. They say there's $133 million in sales that's going to be generated in year 1. Well, I can tell you that I think we can think that Q39 and Chick-fil-A and maybe a 9,300 square foot retail or grocery store is not going to generate $133 million in annual sales. So, but maybe if you bring in Home Depot and all those other ones, then you do that. But those are property owners and investors in this community like Hy-Vee, and that's why Hy-Vee is here today. It's like, if a development wants to come in, let them pay their own way and not on the backs of the other retailers that are already here.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make public testimony? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a question for Mr. Bushak. Has an analysis been done of the feasibility with sales tax generating in a CID and TDD just in the project area?
Well, Baker Tilly's analysis focuses on the TIF plan and the CID revenue and the TDD revenue that would be part of the TIF plan revenue. I think that, does that answer? I think the answer is yes. That analysis has been done with respect to the TIF revenue that's part of the plan that's before you. Maybe another way to say it is the larger sales projections that might occur in on other properties that could be included in the CID don't impact the TIF revenue that would be generated within these 4 discrete areas. Does that answer your question?
Well, but I believe the plan says that 50 cents of each is going to the TIF, right?
Yes.
And the other 50 cents is going to reimbursement to the city for the field house? Is that what it said? So again, a project on the site.
Okay, so let me try to answer the field house component. The real estate contract that we have with Drake to buy that property has a number of different options as far as payment. One of the payment options is for the city council to appropriate on an annual basis the non-captured city sales tax revenues as part of the payment plan. And we could also establish a payment plan that has a set number that the city pays on an annual basis, or the city could pay cash at closing. There's a number of options that we have. But if the city council opts to use, I'll call it the pay-as-you-go method from the uncaptured sales tax revenues, the way we're contemplating that to work is it would only be the revenues that's generated from city sales taxes within these 4 discrete project areas that would be appropriated to make that land payment. And it effectively would come from the city's general fund. Hopefully that answers your question.
Other questions? Additional testimony?
Good evening. My name is Steve Shelton, and I am the Associate Superintendent of Operations for the Lee Summit School District, and it's an honor to be before you tonight. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your service on this commission. I'm here tonight to highlight one of our board policies, Board Policy DCAA. Now, our policies govern our actions and behaviors in the school district. It does not govern your actions or your behaviors and your decisions. This policy, though, does highlight our belief and our support of economic development, bringing in commercial opportunities and development into our school district, bringing opportunities for families to have access to goods and services and housing within our school district. And so the school district is in full support of projects that are that are being presented to you tonight. I've had an opportunity to meet with representatives from Drake, and they have put together a very thoughtful project, in our opinion. Part, as you know, as what's been presented tonight, part of what has been presented to you is a tax increment finance request, and those come in a lot of different forms, shapes. And our encouragement to the commission is to not abate, incentivize this project any more than 50% of the request. We feel like that's a reasonable amount of incentive for any development to move forward. Mr. Bushak earlier tonight represented a dollar bill, and that the property taxes that are paid in this community by our taxpayers, about 66% of those property taxes go to the school district. Well, about 60 to 65% of our overall revenue comes from property taxes. The school district educates students, pays staff, heats buildings, keeps buildings up to grade through our property taxes. And so just as there is an extraordinary need being described by the developer, there is an extraordinary need and responsibility and opportunity by the school district to educate our students. And we need the resources to do that. And so we are in favor of development and bringing in new opportunities that are being presented tonight. But we're asking that to be done in a way that also supports the education system that we have, the wonderful education system we have in our school district, so that we can support our students and support the adults who support those students. We're very fortunate to have 2 wonderful representatives on the commission. Dr. Johnson, thank you. Mr. Haley, thank you for serving. And we know they'll represent us well. So tonight our request is this: just consider that the fact that the TIF is a small portion of what the developer is using. And what was presented, there is still some margin. 7% isn't much. I grant you that. But there still is a little bit of margin because there is that bottom part, maybe 6%. And so if we lower this TIF to 50% instead of 100, I think the developer can still make money. And the district will have just a little bit more to educate our students and support our adults who support our students. So we thank you for your service. We thank you for your time tonight, and we thank you for considering our request.
Jay, any questions? None.
I would like to enter this board policy.
We will deem it as submitted as exhibit number 14.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public testimony? Any additional comments by the applicant or the city? Any additional questions by the commission before I close the public hearing? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. We are now open for discussion. And if no discussion, we are open for a motion. You may.
Does the developer know the proposed unit mix on the?
Oh, well, all right, so we're going to reopen the public hearing so we can get that answered. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's reopen.
Yeah, we're 75% studio and 1 beds and then 25% 2 beds.
Ask that thinking about with consideration.
Yeah,
Comments from the school board.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any additional questions while the public hearing is open? All right, we're going to close the public hearing again.
I'm going to ask a stupid question.
Oh, go ahead.
So 50% of the eats goes to the TIF. Where's the other 50% going? You're going to impose 1.5% on IV. Explain to me where the flow of the funds
Sure.
is.
So within the boundaries of the project area that you have on the screen here, 50% of the sales taxes that are generated by every sales taxing district are captured. So that would be the city, the county, and the zoo district as the existing sales taxing entities. And then if a CID and a TDD is approved by the city council, those would also be captured at 50%. And so what that means is 50% of all of those sales tax revenues would go into the special allocation fund and become available to reimburse the developer. The other 50% that's not captured flows to the sales taxing districts like normal. So the city's 5 sales taxes would flow, that 50% would flow to the city as normal, zoo district, half as normal, and county half as normal. And then the CID and the TDD would also receive their half, but those become reimbursement sources for the developer.
So on the 1.5%, they're paying the base rate. Now we're going to add 1.5%. In CID, 50% of that's going to go to the TIF.
Within these 4 project areas.
Where's the other half going?
So when a CID operates, the sales tax revenue is collected within whatever boundaries it exists. And then that goes to the CID to pay CID reimbursable project costs. So the CID there'll be a petition that's presented to the city council, and that CID petition will specify with precision what public improvements can be funded by that CID. And then the uncaptured dollars flow to the CID to then reimburse those costs.
So again, we're asking retailers not in the project area to fund project costs approved under CID and TDD, plus the TIF, within the project area, even though they're not in the project area.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate conclusion.
There's been no analysis of what it looks like without those other retailers. We don't have a map or a list of what other retailers are being included in the financial assumptions. Is that correct?
So the map that Ms. Bushy had showed is the map that's being contemplated for the CID boundaries. The petition has not been filed with the city yet, so there is no petition that establishes those boundaries. And I guess the best answer is the boundaries have not been established because the petition has not been filed. But that's
I'm
that's
worried about the projections because of the financial
Right.
feasibility. That seems like that's my response. So we have a list of the retailers that are within that map that she put up there?
No, not a list yet. We don't. That petition has not been finished, so the answer is no, not yet.
We don't have a breakdown of the projection that says of all the revenue coming in for the reimbursement to the developer, this much is from outside the project area, this much is from inside the project.
So that goes back to this slide, which is the TIF plan as presented to you, and all of the data associated with the TIF plan is based on the revenues that are generated in those 4 discrete areas that I just showed you. And any revenues generated by the CID outside the TIF area are technically not within your jurisdiction because you're analyzing the TIF plan.
But the
And those
feasibility of the TIF plan is contingent upon the taxes.
that's captured within the boundaries of the 4 project areas that I've been showing you. So
Generated by some of the activities.
the simplest way to say it would be, if Hy-Vee is not included, that will affect the CID revenue, but it will not affect the TIF revenue.
But it could affect the feasibility of the project, which is
Correct.
what Ms. Bushyhead's argument is.
That is very correct, yes.
So we don't know if this project can stand on its own without.
That is the question Ms. Bushyhead has
Yeah,
raised.
I think the best answer is, this TIF plan does not impose a sales tax on any properties outside the boundaries of this project area. The CID could do that, and the revenue projections that the developers presented do assume that those other businesses are included, but that does not impact the TIF revenue that's before you and your consideration of the TIF plan. Only the revenues that are generated in these 4 areas are the revenues that are part of the TIF plan that's before you tonight.
Isn't it reasonable to consider it though, since it addresses the feasibility of the project?
I cannot argue with that conclusion.
So the 1.5 cent sales tax on Hy-Vee, half of that is not going to the TIF because it's not the project area, correct?
Correct.
So that all goes into,
It's a 1 cent on the CID.
Yeah, so,
but it's a half on the other one.
so I'll handle that issue in 1 second, but to be clear, this TIF plan only collects revenue within these 4 project areas. If no other properties are included in the CID, that can impact the feasibility of the incentive package as a whole to the developer, but that doesn't impact the TIF revenue projection, which only comes from those 4 project areas. It's a difficult issue because this is what the city council is going to have to wrestle with ultimately.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Stetson.
So to clarify, you're asking us to approve a TIF plan.
Not me.
I'm
the city's thing.
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to throw that stone at you.
I'm not advocating anything.
I got it. We're being asked, how about that? Is that better? We're being asked to approve a TIF plan that will also require other financial tools to make the TIF plan feasible.
That's probably a fair conclusion unless the
But-
developer tells us otherwise.
But we also don't have the ability to say anything but yes or no to the resolution.
You could add additional recommendations to the resolution if you'd like, whatever those might be.
So we could kind of do our own but-for test on our resolution saying, we may approve this, but for if the CID and the TDD are approved.
That could be your recommendation. I mean, so it sounds like the issue that's clearly being set up, and we know that this is an issue that the city council will have to wrestle with, and we've been preparing for that, which is, city council, should you include these other properties in this area? That's known that we're going to have to wrestle with that issue in front of the city council. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I mean, again, I think the TIF plan as it's presented to you and the revenue that would be generated by this TIF plan is not affected by whether Hy-Vee is included or not, or any other businesses are included or not, but the inclusion of those other properties will affect the CID revenues, which are very important to the developer, which is within the city council's jurisdiction exclusively.
Ms. Johnson.
Sorry, I want to make this clear for myself, the new girl. So my understanding is it's being asked that I make a decision tonight only on the TIF, but the financial feasibility may not be certain because we don't have these other items yet.
I think that's an inevitable conclusion of the sequence of events. And so when I mentioned that the LCRA board has already made their recommendation just on the abatement piece, you're making a recommendation to the city council on the TIF plan, and then the city council is in the position of evaluating the LCRA and the TIF plan and the CID issues that have been brought up tonight. That's, the city council will certainly have to wrestle with those issues, but you're making a recommendation on the TIF plan alone.
Even though I don't know how feasible this project is going to be.
Jonathan Swift.
I can't argue with the dilemma that you're faced with at this point. I think that's a fair conclusion. Oh, and the other thing that I'll mention is the developer's proposal is only to have the CID 1 cent sales tax on Hy-Vee, not the TDD, I believe. I'll let them clarify.
So before you leave and before we get additional, and I understand the CID petition has not been filed yet, but my recollection is there are basically two types of CIDs. Those that would be permanent, that exist, like taking care of a neighborhood pool or something, or sewer district in a residential area.
Yeah.
Or those that are more one-time, which is pay for the infrastructure gets put in, and then the CID goes away.
Correct. There's two types of CIDs. One is the political subdivision form of CID, and the other is a nonprofit corporation form. The nonprofit corporation form, which is fairly rare, can be used like for neighborhood subdivision pools where the CID imposes a special assessment on properties to pay for common improvements. Fairly rare, but has been used a couple times. What's more common in Lee Summit is the political subdivision form of a CID, which imposes a sales tax to pay for public improvements. Those are limited to 27 years at the most by statute, and they do turn off when it pays for its designated public improvements.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd just like to make some overall statements with respect to the conversation that's been occurring. Our choice when developing a TIF plan is to either be comprehensive with respect to all the tools that you see in the table up on the screen now, or to present a TIF plan to you that's siloed just on TIF pilots and TIF eats. We firmly believe that we would be doing the community, the public, a disservice to just show you one facet of the project. So what we've done within the TIF plan is to show you the LCRA, the CID, the TDD, and the TIF all together so that there can be a comprehensive view. There are a complex set of assumptions that are made in order to create the TIF plan and that are part of the projections. Our return on the project with all the incentives, we believe is at a very modest and minimal level, one necessary to get the project to move forward, but not that over-enriches the developer with incentives. And I believe the ultimate conclusion of Baker Tilly's analysis agrees with that. But for a set of incentives, this project is not moving forward. This commission's purview is specifically the TIF, but the CID, TDD, and LCRA are important components of that as well, and that will be duly considered at the appropriate time. The LCRA board happens to have come before the TIF commission, make its recommendation to the city council. Now, based on the statutory process, is the proper time for the TIF commission to be undertaking its efforts and evaluation. And then, as Mr. Bushek mentioned, in concert, the city council will review all the items that are within its purview. Ultimately, the approval of the LCRA, based on the LCRA board's recommendation, their approval of the TIF based on, in part, on this TIF commission's recommendation, and then they will act with respect to the CID and make some decisions with respect to support the TDD or not. We're here saying that a multifaceted set of incentives are necessary
to fix all the problems that we've talked about, the complex land assemblage, the utilities, the blight clearance, all the things that we've talked about. It is a complex project. So you're being asked to evaluate the reasonableness of the assumptions that we've made within the TIF plan, which have been evaluated by a third-party financial advisor as well. If along the way, a component of these incentives that are on the table above are not approved, we will need to reevaluate the plan and determine whether the project as envisioned can be moved forward or not. Given the fact of where our return profile is, there's not a lot of margin for error there, but there's a natural sequence of processes that have to occur, multi-levels of recommendations, approvals, and processes, all in the public purview, and that we've been very transparent about with respect to the project. The project is at a critical time right now. It's taken a long time to develop to assemble the property, to develop the plan, and we have users that want to come into the city of Lee Summit and start to conduct business, and we want to prepare the project for them. So we would ask for your consideration. We know there are a number of assumptions, all hinging upon a complex set of assumptions in the TIF plan, but for multifaceted projects, we are not undertaking an unusual process here. This is actually quite a typical process for a set of layered incentives as necessary for this project. So I just wanted to make those statements to put a little context to the overall conversation.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Willis.
So if this commission would make a favorable recommendation contingent on you getting the other three approvals or conditioned upon LCRA and CID and TDD approvals, that's acceptable to you because this thing in a vacuum just by itself is not acceptable, or am I misreading what you're saying, sir?
I think that's accurate. I think that's accurate, and it's consistent with the TIF plan that we've put before you for your consideration.
Clarify that because I get confused here easily.
Ms. Bushyhead, I think you had additional comment.
Have in your TIF plan, as part of the TIF that you're considering tonight, Exhibit 5, Sources and Uses. I think many of the questions that you've had in trying to understand how the money comes into this plan can be resolved there. And that exhibit tells us this TIF plan is not feasible unless the broader incentives occur. And by approving a TIF plan or even moving it forward this evening is kind of an interesting way into backdooring those decisions when it comes to the City Council.
Thank you. All right. Any additional questions that we will need on the testimony before we reclose the public hearing? Ms. Johnson.
So I know that there's a sequence or things that happen consecutively or at the same time, but just curious from looking at this and educate myself about the sequence. If the CID is the bulk of this, is there a reason it doesn't start there and then come to the other commissions?
Yeah, the answer is fairly straightforward. The CID petition goes straight to the City Council. The TIF plan has to go through this TIF commission, then to the City Council. The LCRA plan has to go through the LCRA board, then the City Council. And I don't think we've ever presented an incentive package to the City Council in a piecemeal fashion where this month we're going to consider the CID and then go through the TIF commission, the LCRA, and then consider, that would be really disjointed.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So there's not like a CID commission?
No, that's correct. So I'll explain the process to you. The petition has to be filed within whatever the geographic boundaries are. The petition has to be signed by more than 50% per capita, which means head count. So you count up the total number of properties. More than 50% by head count have to sign. And then you tally up all the total assessed value as determined by Jackson County. And more than 50% by assessed value have to sign the petition. When the petition's signed, it goes straight to the city council for a public hearing, and then the city council can approve the CID or not, and if they approve it, it has to be by ordinance. So there's no other body that considers the CID before the city council hears the petition.
Just for clarification, Drake Development controls more than 50% of the parcels. Is that correct? Or the assessed valuation of the part, or the, however that calculation?
I don't know if the developer controls, but I think the developers indicated that we could achieve 50%, the 50% signing requirement on both counts.
Yeah.
The other thing, one other thought that I'll mention, I understand the dilemma that you're faced with based on the testimony tonight, but I was thinking, what if the plan, the TIF plan, did not include any of the things that is being objected to? So let's say that the TIF plan completely ignored the CID. Let's say the TIF plan pretended like the CID is not formed because it's uncertain at this point. I would never recommend that plan come forward, because you need to know the other incentives and specifically what revenues are generated within these 4 project areas for you to make a decision. And to not include an analysis of the other revenues as part of your TIF plan analysis, I wouldn't let that TIF plan go forward. So I think it's very normal to be considering all these, and the stage that we're at now, this is a fairly normal sequence. Eventually, the city council has the unenviable position of wrestling with all these policy issues.
Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you just said, and I don't have a problem with the process. I get it. I'm curious on the CID piece, though, is it feasible, and maybe this is a question for the developers folks, that a different CID proposal come forward and get approved? For example, you take the Hy-Vee out and you put the Home Depot in. That's a potential
Correct.
resolution to Ms. Bushyhead's.
Right. There's a lot of potential permutations for the boundaries of the CID, and what you just said, I think, has to be the answer. We'd have to look to the developer, what do you think of this request? What do you think about not including Hy-Vee? What does that do to your numbers? Do we still have a project or not? That's the basic question we'll have to ask.
But the point is, the CID could be completely different.
Correct.
Right? They could go find the same numbers, just use different retailers.
That's a possibility.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Y'all typically consider the small.
Yes, I think that's common. I used to work for a number of different city clients before I came back in-house to the city, and I would say it's fairly common in Missouri for taxing districts like a school district to request that the capture be limited to 50%. And the way that would work mechanically is the TIF plan would technically, it starts by capturing 100% unless you say otherwise, but the plan could include what's called a 50% surplus or a capital contribution to the school district to achieve only the 50% capture. That is a tool that's used in other jurisdictions. Hasn't been in Lee Summit, but that's an issue that could be considered by the city council.
Is there any reason we didn't suggest that to the developer whenever he came to us with this plan?
I think the answer is the developer presents the plan to us as it sits today. We've analyzed it and we present it to you. We're not in a position of trying to back them down from the revenues they're requesting. This is their request. It comes to you, and you'll make a recommendation. And if your recommendation is capture should only be 50% instead of 100, I would suggest you make that recommendation to the city council if you'd like to do that.
Mr. Willard.
Mr. Busick, are you comfortable with my suggestion that a recommendation of approval, it has to be tonight, be conditioned upon the other 3 approvals?
I think that...
Or does it have to be flat up or down tonight, sir?
No, I think if you included that condition, that would be fine with me. And I would go so far as to say, I think that's sort of an inevitable conclusion, meaning even if you don't make that additional recommendation, I think it's the case that if the CID doesn't generate sufficient revenues for the developer, they might not undertake the project, and that's what they alluded to. They need to consider ultimately the city council's decision on all of these incentives and whether the project can move forward, or maybe it needs to change and be scaled back in some fashion. I'm not sure, but I think your additional recommendation is fine, but I also think even if you don't make that recommendation, that's the inevitable result.
I have a question for school
Yes.
district. For the school district, the TIF is what, $11.9, $12 million? So when you ask for 50%, are you asking for 50% on the recapture or reduction of that by 50%?
We're asking for 50% of that recapture.
Recapture,
That,
okay,
that,
thank
that
you.
portion that they're withholding, that they were holding from us, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Any additional questions or testimony? Please, come on up.
I very much respect the comments of the Associate Superintendent with respect to the concerns about the school district. I wanted to just point out a couple of things. Number one, the incremental pilots do not affect the current school district's revenues. There is a base established so that they continue to receive their existing revenues, and then there's a split of the incremental property taxes from that point forward. So I want to make that clear. It is clear in the cost-benefit analysis, but I just wanted to reiterate that. I would also say that we believe that this project is at a key juncture where we've got the opportunity to seize upon some very good users to come into the project. Timing is important for us, and we believe we've brought before you a proposal that is very close to the minimum possible to make this financially feasible. And so I would just caution the commission that trimming portions of the ask has been very carefully structured in concert with discussions, extended discussions with city staff, our own internal deliberations, our own internal analysis, increasing levels of understanding of the costs, environmental issues, what have you, with respect to the project. We feel like we're putting forth a very prudent set of incentives here, and to trim any one of those incentives, whether it be the CID, the TDD, the TIF. Obviously, TIF is what we're focusing on this evening with your purview, jeopardizes the viability of the project. And so we would respectfully request consideration by the commission of the entire proposal as we presented it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Any additional public testimony or questions? All right, we're going to close the public hearing for like the sixth time. All right, discussion among the commission. And it sounds like it may be that there's a political question that city council is going to have to answer that they can only answer if we move it forward. Been crafting a motion, Mr. Willers. Might as well make it.
I don't want to put my fellow commission members through the brain damage of my 4-point approval deal. If you feel good as this is presented, that you want to move it forward with a favorable recommendation, do it. It's cleaner, it's simpler. Mine is complex, and due to my humble upbringing, worrying about money. And so I just don't like aspects of it in presentation, and that's why I was going to make it conditioned on 4 other things, and maybe that's an impossible trip too far. So maybe a commission should go up or down just as she sits, but.
Yes, Mr.
I would
Hudson.
just say we're one step in a process of due diligence, and I would suggest that we move forward with a resolution before you.
I would like to make, so having run LCRA for about 9 years, one of the things we looked at was what's it cost to put the land back into a greenfield state. That budget's about $16.5 million. Asking for 44. The number seems high, just relative to, I mean, if we put the $16.5 million in, then you've got the sewers, the road, everything seems to be back to greenfield state with the infrastructure that they want. That's the way we used to look at it from an LCRA standpoint, was we'll get it back to greenfield, then it's up to the developer. And if it's not as profitable, because I don't know what interest rate on financing costs was used in the analysis and things like that, that's really not, timing is the developer's question, not ours. If, you wait for rates to come down, rates to go out, that's not our problem. So just a comment, it seems excessive.
Additional comments, discussion? I did look, the radar indicates that we're probably still 2 hours away from storm, so we could discuss for 2 more hours.
Well, and I'll make one other comment. I think it's appropriate to listen to our school district. Apartments are going to add kids. I mean, not everybody can afford to buy a home. In fact, very few. Housing affordability is an all-time low. So we're going to put kids in that district. We need to pay for them.
Ms. Johnson?
I was just going to say, I'd like to add to that as a school board member that LSR 7 is the largest employer in this area, and we are a destination district. People move to Lee Summit because of our schools. And so I think for me being able to support this would require 50%. Thank you.
Chairman, if I'd argue, being on the TIF for a while, I know we've done analysis on residents and apartments, and it's generally not kids we're bringing. I would argue that we're going to put more teachers in these apartments than we're going to put kids. And I'm not a fan of apartments in Lee Summit, by the way, and I'm a huge fan of the school district. So I appreciate the analysis continuing to give the tax revenue, property tax revenue to the school district that they're currently getting. And I think, several of these TIF districts that we've approved over in the past are now coming back onto those tax rolls. And that's the area that I always get crazy in my head about. I understand the school district wanting essentially a part of the deal, and I see the benefit for that. But I also think, well, they're currently getting this, and if that thing sits there for another 23 years and they get the same that they've gotten, that's the balance that I'm looking for. And we're improving sales tax and all these other property taxes around that piece of property that will inevitably help the school district. If we didn't TIF some of these districts that we have, our city wouldn't be moving in the direction that it is, which also increases property tax for a school district. So that's the balance I go through in my head as I'm thinking about these things.
Additional comments, questions, thoughts, motion? Ms. Hudson.
I'd make a motion to read the resolution, I guess, I don't know what the best way to say that is.
So a motion to approve the resolution, specifically including findings A through I?
So moved?
Yes, okay. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Asel? Nay? Commissioner Bates? Commissioner Freeman?
Aye.
Commissioner Haynes?
Aye.
Commissioner Willerth?
Nay.
Commissioner Haley?
Nay.
Commissioner Johnson?
Nay.
Commissioner Hudson?
Aye.
Commissioner Carnes?
Aye.
Did I miss someone?
All right, we have 5-4, motion carries. All right, roundtable. Hearing none, hearing no objection, we adjourn. Thank you.